Here we are today in Warm Springs, Georgia, in the Piedmont region of west central Georgia. This is a very important historical place in Georgia. One of the most important, in fact, that you can find. One of my favorite places in Warm Springs, Georgia is the Little White House, where FDR stayed during his visits to Warm Springs to try to find a cure for polio. Franklin Delano Roosevelt first traveled to Warm Springs in 1924 looking for a cure to his polio, which he was diagnosed with in 1922. FDR was elected as the New York governor in 1928, and from 1932 to 1944, he was the President of the United States of America. FDR led the American people through the Great Depression with deals such as the New Deal, which was inspired by his time in the Warm Springs when he saw people's troubles such as poverty and no electricity. His New Deal gave hope, jobs, and electricity to families who couldn't afford. One of the most important time periods in FDR's life and presidency was in 1941, where he declared war on Japan after the Pearl Harbor bombing. After that, he sadly died from a stroke months before the war would end. Because he stayed here so frequently, there were often military and Secret Service personnel who stayed in these sentry posts here to guard the house of the president. Here behind me, in the middle, that little White House was where FDR stayed during his visits to the Warm Springs. Also, there's the servants' quarters and the guest house, which are also additions to the campus. This is the famous portrait of FDR, which is being painted at the time of his death in the Little White House. And over here, as you can see, is the finished portrait of what it would look like if they had ever finished it. In another place in Warm Springs, the actual pools where FDR and other polio patients came to swim to find relief for their polio. As you can see behind me, there's actual pieces of equipment that would be used as therapy for the people who could not actually sit up in the pools. The actual original plan for the pools was to have 3 separate pools, a men's, a women, and an open pool. But FDR came in and had the idea of combining all the pools and making them one big pool. The pools, and there's a ramp here which was actually used for people who could not walk, and they had wheelchairs to wheel them into the pool. Also, there's an example of the 88 degrees water here at a fountain. Another interesting thing is the equipment here, which was used to lay down patients in the water when they could not stand by themselves. The springs here are called warm springs and not hot springs because they refer to it as warm because it was less than the body temperature, but still a good temperature. The warm water of the springs brought 2 main advantages to the polio patients. The first was the water was buoyant, allowing them to move easier in the water. The second one was the warmth of the water loosened up their muscles and allowed them to do the much needed exercise that brought strength to their weakened bones and muscles. Another great attraction here in Warm Springs, Georgia is the fish hatcheries. In 1898, the government put in place 10 fish hatcheries, this being the first and oldest. They used to breed and study fish here, but no longer do. Today, these grounds are only used for research and rehabilitation purposes. They are also breeding carp, which eat the invasive plant species in the lakes that are harmful to the environment. As you can see, Warm Springs has many great attractions and lots of interesting history, which you can come and see any day you would like to.